Hello, awesome people. I hope you're having an amazing day today. Today we're taking a look at the short story, The Inhabitant of the Length. It's a 1964 short story in my collection, Cold Print by Ramsey Campbell, that we've been doing a deep dive into. It's about 35 pages long. I read it last night in about an hour. So I knocked it out pretty quickly over the bathtub for the second time. This collection we've been doing a deep dive into. Previously, I had reviewed two short stories by Ramsey Campbell, a fantasy short story that was republished in an Appendix N collection of stuff that was on Gygax's Appendix N for the most influential fantasy stuff for his game Dungeons and Dragons in the first edition Dungeons and Masters Guide in 1979. He listed an editors in a collection of fantasy stuff that was very influential, and a place to go for inspiration too. And one of Ramsey Campbell's short stories, a fantasy one, was there, and that's the only fantasy short story I've actually read by Ramsey Campbell. The other was a collection of 100 horror short stories. It was about 600 pages long, so they're each about roughly 6 pages long, which is pretty short. Then I knocked out a Ramsey Campbell short story for you as well. If I recall, that one was called Out of Copyright. So those are the two that I've reviewed. So I wanted to do a deep dive. As a reminder, this is Halloween, and so I like to do the month dedicated to Cthulhu Mythos stories for my 3 reviews each week. So I wanted to reread the Cold Print collection that I got. This was reprinted in the 90s of all of his short stories, in the 60s that he published, and then later on in his Cthulhu Mythos stuff, which are the first things that he wrote. He wrote this short story very early in his career. His first short story in this one was published when he was in his teens in 1962, and now we're just, 1964, right? So just a couple of years later. This is still very early in Ramsey Campbell's career. So I wanted to go ahead and knock out this collection. Now, my printing of this, which I'll link to you in the comments below, is the second edition version of this. So I'll link you to one of those in the comments below, so you can pick them up and read it along with me. Again, I keep my reviews spoiler free, so that way you don't have to worry about me spoiling the review for you when you just found out about the story, The Inhabitant of the Lake. It's the longest short story in the collection so far. It's the second longest one after a 32-page one, a couple pages shorter. And it's my favorite short story of the first few in the collection to me, going back and rereading it for the first time in like 15 years. So I definitely have enjoyed it, and I'm giving it a 7+ out of 10. The first 4 I gave 7 minuses to. The last story I gave just a plain 7 to. This one I'm giving a 7+ to. So it's more like 7.2 or 7.3, and I'm running down to a 7 rather than. And you can definitely tell that he uses his space well. It's gripping from the beginning. It's well written, but this is an early Ramsey Campbell short story. So what I mean by that is it's just horror. He doesn't have the layered abilities that he'll craft later on after a couple of decades in the field of layering in the sense of wonder and the sense of awesomeness in the same pages where he's talking about horror that he'll do later. For example, I've read one of his novels called Midnight Sun that I read about 10 years ago for him after I picked it up from Amazon, and it's much later in his career in the 80s, and it has those sort of feels in it. Probably the master of that was Algernon Blackwood with his short story The Willows, which is considered by many, including me, to be the best horror short story of all time. And H.P. Lovecraft agrees that's his favorite horror short story of all time too. So you can definitely read it online. And I've reviewed that short story for you too. And Algernon Blackwood is generally considered one of the masters of that. H.P. Lovecraft got better with that in his last decade of writing, and so he also got better with that as he got near the end of his career too. And so Ramsey Campbell is definitely better with that shorter stuff too. So it's definitely something that he definitely is known for later on. But this is just a pure horror short story, The Inhabitant of the Lake, for you. So there you are. The Cthulhu Mythos, as a reminder, is a shared mythos, so that was created initially by H.P. Lovecraft to continue to reuse elements from earlier stories to later stories, and then he would bring in his friends and fellow co-workers, writers for a magazine called in the pulp era called Weird Tales, and he would bring their elements into his own. And so it's a shared universe of canon that was all everybody was writing each other's universes and sharing each other's story elements into their own intakes on it, all at the same time, in what I call Generation 1. Generation 1's roughly about 1940, a couple of years after the death of Lovecraft. In Generation 2, I consider roughly from 1940 to roughly 1965, and this is 1964, so this is coming in near the end of the second generation of stuff. The next generation is roughly 1960 to 1965 to 1985. That does include some more Ramsey Campbell stuff later on. And then from 85 to now, I consider the fourth generation of Cthulhu Mythos stuff for you. So I do consider this a late generation 2 short story. And it definitely shows that it tends to be heavier on the Cthulhu Mythos elements. And this one, but this one is actually pretty light, which I like about it. The only major element that it has in there is the Necronomicon, which is mentioned in passing. This is set in Ramsey Campbell's own addition to the Cthulhu Mythos called Severn Valley, which is set in the UK. It has some more rumors of dark things that have happened in the past. That have now tainted the world, and so we're gonna be set in this. Our main characters, one of them has just bought a house in the first few pages, and that has been uninhabited for a while, and is rumored to be ghosted because he is an artist who likes to draw these really macabre paintings that are hard to sell, but they're very talented. Which reminded me of Pickard's Model, by the way, an H.P. Lovecraft short story, which I've reviewed for you in the horror genre. Anyway, he buys a house for inspiration that's supposed to be haunted and is also really cheap. That's by this lake in the wilderness, and that lake is the title. And there's going to be something in it, as you can tell from the title of the short story. But again, no spoilers. I'm not going to tell what winds up happening. The Necronomicon is here mentioned, but it's just in sort of passing. We just know that the person who has bought this lake has read the Necronomicon and done some dark things when he's college, and now he's trying to get away from it. And we'll find out those things in the first pages of a short story. So there you are. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. Have you read The Inhabitant of the Lake by Ramsey Campbell? If so, what did you think about it? Let's talk about in the comments below. Did you think it was better than a 7 out of 10? Would you like to talk about some of the worse? Would you like to talk about some of the spoilers in the comments below? Hey, let's do so. If you enjoyed this video, why not hit that subscribe button? There's going to be a lot more of these to follow. And then finally, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and investing it in watching my video. We all have so many things that are happening in our lives, and we're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. So thanks again, and have an amazing day.